This is something that I had to get out quickly after watching the new Genshin teaser released yesterday, The God's Limits. And after seeing my friends' reactions, as well as many members of the community, I found the teaser large in scope, visually incredible, ambitious, but I do not believe that it was the best story-wise, and it has revealed what could be considered a weakness of Genshin's approach to storytelling. Now, in order to explain that, I should first mention how many times that the shades are mentioned in the Archon quests and story quests, seeing as those are the main forms of content which people are playing in. There's one mention in Inazuma Istarath, who is not referred to by name, but by subheading, is explained to have helped Makoto create the sacred Sakura in Raiden's second story quest. There is one mention of Naberius in the Paralogism Archon quest. She is referred to by name, and it is said that Rhine-Daughter, aka Gold, aka Albedo's mom, aka one of the sinners, aka part of Hexenzirkel, has eaten her heart and fused with her. There is multiple mentions of Renova in the Natlan Archon quest, and she is the only shade to actually make an appearance in-game at the end of the 5.3 Archon quest Incandescent Ode of Resurrection. There's one appearance of Asmodee at the beginning of the game, serving as the unknown god, and she is mentioned a couple of times by that name elsewise. But judging by my friend's reaction to this, these 4 mentions are not really enough. This is me in green, and my friend in purple. He's asking who's voicing who, and I said Venti VA is voicing Istarath. He's like, who the fuck are these people? I'm like, Istarath is the shade of time. And he's like, the what of what? Does the Archon quest explain that? And I said, I don't know, maybe, but maybe not. And it's kind of true, because Renova isn't really referred to as a shade of death, so much as she is the ruler of death, which has sort of a different connotation to it, and also doesn't really explain her actual role in the Genshin cosmology, that being a servant of the heavenly principles, who is not just, an island floating up in the sky, but an actual being. I might want to do a series like this with the Sinners as well, but we'll have to see in the future. Either way, it's clear that the game is in pretty desperate need of rewrites to properly draw the player's attention to what is important regarding the shades, and that these rewrites have to occur earlier in the game. These rewrites will be as inoffensive and non-invasive as possible. I will not be removing anything, I will only be adding things, although I do believe there is a fair bit that could be removed in this game. We would start off in Mondstadt by having Venti drawing a short connection between himself and Istarath in the Mondstadt Archon quest. He doesn't need to explain exactly what that is, but having that information be locked behind his character story 3 is pretty bad, I would say. He should, if not mention Shade of Time, mention Istarath. It's becoming clear that there isn't a real reason to have kept this concealed, nor was there a good reason to have Venti not have a second story quest where he would reveal big lore, since they were gonna just reveal Istarath having a connection to Venti in this thing anyways. So, the lore theorists guessed the connection basically instantly, the casuals did not. I think that should have been amended. He should have talked about it a little. And this will also go towards an idea that I have regarding the Paralogism Archon quest, as for how that could have been improved. In part 2, Liyue, I believe that can stay the same in all honesty. Maybe Zhongli could bring up the shades as a concept, maybe the servants of the heavenly principles. He doesn't have to name any, or their domains. I was thinking at one point Hu Tao could either name drop Renova or the Ruler of Death or a different epithet, but at the end of the day, Hu Tao doesn't appear in any mainline story, and she's also a human who doesn't really have a reason to know anything. It's possible that her ancestors did know Renova, due to the Staff of Homa being modeled after her, along with the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma, but that's something I'll have to discuss a little bit later. In the end, I think that it's not a good idea to have Hu Tao know anything. So Inazuma is where I'd like to add the biggest lore drops, personally. It's very clear that A has the most experience with the shades out of the Archons, so she should be the one to inform the regular audience about Renova and Istarath, while keeping Naberius and Asmodee secret. If asked about those two, she can just say that she doesn't know, but she can inform the traveler she doesn't think that either Renova or Istaroth are the unknown god, although they could be. During Raiden's second story quest, they actually do mention Istaroth by name, but rather than confirming her as a shade, they simply refer to her as a higher power, as if everyone in the conversation is supposed to automatically know her from that. If Venti mentioned her, we would know more about that, and A could say Istaroth as is the shade of time, which would be, I think, a little bit better towards letting people know. I think at this point in the game, that being 3 Archon quests in, it's okay to have some knowledge about the endgame. I mean, you don't need to keep everything secret. Sumeru, Sumeru really has nothing to do with the shades. I'm really struggling with this because now that we know the progression of the lore, I really don't think that Sumeru fits in as the 4th Archon quest chapter. It has to do with Conria. It doesn't have anything to do with the shades. Inazuma does have to do with the shades. It has very little to do with Conria. The two of them basically have opposite lore drops. I would say personally that I think Sumeru belongs after Liyue because of the Chasm quests having basically the biggest Conria related lore drops, and that Inazuma should go after Sumeru because it has the biggest shade lore drops, and we can see the shade's handiwork more in Natlan, and also should have in Fontaine. Speaking of Fontaine, Fontaine I believe needs the biggest rewrites. This late in the game, there is zero reason to have as little lore as it does. I mean, Fontaine's lore drops basically amount to a confirmation of the Dragon War, a teaser for Sertologi, and that's about it. I'm not counting the bedtime story quest. That is very clearly a Sumeru level quest that was simply delayed until Fontaine. In Fontaine, I would like Nouvelette to have memory of the Sovereigns versus the Heavenly Principles War, and maybe discuss them a little bit. And during this time, we should reveal that it was Naberius, who's the Shade of Life, who created Egeria, who's the first Hydro Archon, and who created Fontainians. Naberius's life-giving powers are probably linked to the Primordial Sea, and so that should be something that's brought up. And if not then maybe Focalors can bring her up when discussing how she created Farina using the Archon's power. But more importantly than that, I think Nouvelette should discuss the war against the Heavenly Principles, and during that time maybe we could get some 2D pre-rendered images and we can see what he looked like in the past while fighting some outlines of 4 women, those being the shades. You can make them very obscure if you want, but I think it's just good to put that image within the audience's mind. Natlan is good. It name drops Renova very quickly, and she shows up towards the end. I mean, her appearance was done really well there, in my opinion. She's creepy, otherworldly. She literally changes the atmosphere just by showing up, and her presence is extremely meaningful and significant. So, Natlan, I wouldn't change a thing. For Paralogism, however, I really dislike that Albedo casually mentions that Naberius has been subsumed by gold, and I don't know how to fix it. The problem is, at this point in the game, a lot of players, even non-casuals, one of my friends has played a lot of the world quests, and he completed the entire Natlan world quest chain, but he's also conditioned to just skip lots of dialogue just because he finds it really boring, and I can't even argue with it because by and large Genshin dialogue really is boring and bloated. So the problem with including these sort of lore drops is that there's a chance that people won't be paying attention just because they are conditioned to not pay attention because it's not important information. Even though these 3 lines specifically are important information, even though they're just delivered within the context of a casual conversation. So, what can you do? Well, I think during the portion of the quest in which Albedo is stealing Durin's life force from the heart of Dragonspine, I think that then would be the best time for him to mention Nibarius. Like, something like, this technique is modeled after my master, who used a similar one to combine herself with the Shade of Life, Nibarius. Uh, since she would have been mentioned in Fontaine earlier, given my rewrites, that would make more sense to people, and I think that would be for the best. And then afterwards, the traveler can meet Venti, and he can ask about Istaroth, and Venti, he can be mysterious or whatever, but if we're mentioning Istaroth, then that's going to put that name back in people's minds. Uh, it's all about recognition, you know? A lot of people are just watching this animated short and going, who are these people? And not really understanding anything. And so in order to get why these characters are so important, they need to be in the game. They need to be they need to have some sort of presence, not just 500 years ago, 3,000 years ago in the past when they deleted some civilizations. I'm talking about the current Archon quests. So, given this new set of rewrites in which Venti mentions Istaroth, in which Zhongli mentions the Shades, in which A gives us information about Renova and Istaroth and what they've done, in which Neuvillette is able to talk about the Shades, and where Focalors can talk about Nibarius, in which Natlan literally has the appearance of Renova, and Paralogism has more information on Nibarius as well as Istaroth. By the time we reach this teaser, The God's Limits again, no one would be surprised that the Shades are all women. No one would be surprised as to why they're so important, and nobody would really be surprised as to who they are, except for Asmodee, which I do believe is still meant to be somewhat of a surprise, and it's something that does seem more deliberate than the hiding of Renova, Nibarius, and Istaroth throughout the previous Archon quests. So Genshin's big problem is not its lack of foresight. If anything, all this shows how much foresight was put into the game. The problem is that it is terrible at communicating its foresight and its foreshadowing to its casual and even its non-casual player base. I mean, you could 100% the game, play every world quest, story quest, Archon quest. You could explore every region and read every book, and you would still probably have no idea who these are, because these are all little tidbits of lore that are just so spread out throughout the game and combined with so much meaningless filler information that it is genuinely impossible for a single person to compile all of this information. It is only through following lore communities, lore tubers who aggregate from the lore communities, or just you just have to be built different, I suppose, if you were to solve this on your own. But for people who are into theory crafting, building their characters, only playing the Archon quests and the story quests, and the world quests, or people who just like doing teapots or shipping or any of that, all of which is a good way to interact with the game and its fandom, then you have no idea about the Shades. And this rewrite would bring the Shades into the back of people's minds so that they have something to fall back on when this teaser drops and when Nodcry inevitably begins to utilize them as actual characters instead of historical figures from thousands of years ago only mentioned in world quests and item descriptions.